join us. But welcome, my name is Vinnu Deshetty. I'm the founder and CEO here at Eva Reg. Looking forward to having you today. We love doing these webinars because we've learned a lot along the way and love hearing your stories and have great partners like the panelists that we have today. But before I introduce them, let me go through a quick, very quick housekeeping stuff items for you guys. So one is this session is being recorded, as you've heard the great Zoom voice of God tell us. We'll have that recording out to you in a couple of days, early next week, so that you can take a look at it and review anything that you might want to. Any links or any sources that the panelists share, we're going to try to share those with you in the chat section today. If not, we'll make sure that that comes along in the email that we send you along with the recording. This session does qualify for CAE, CEM, and CMP credits. But the catch is you have to watch it live and you have to stay for the majority of the time, and we'll submit all of that paperwork early next week. But if you have any questions, just let us know. And the last thing is, if you have any technical issues, you can contact our person behind the scenes, behind the big curtain, Gil Gonzalez. He's our event director here at Eva, and he's here to help you. So if you need any help, let him know. And then lastly, I always say one more thing, but there's always another thing. If you have any questions or want to share anything with us, definitely use the chat box. We love to hear from you. You can also use the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we'll get to your questions as soon as we can. We'll definitely leave room at the end of the session because I think you'll have lots of questions. But without any other delay, I said one more thing, and the poll. We're going to leave this poll up for a few more seconds here while we go through introductions of our panelists, but feel free to enter the information there. There's two questions that we're really asking. We just want to kind of see who's joining us today. Do you currently have a partnership program? And then what kind of challenges or barriers do you foresee? And we'll share those results in a minute. But I am excited to have our two panelists. I've known them for quite some time. Bruce, welcome. We were just talking about how we've kind of known each other for a long time, but we probably haven't seen each other in person for a while. How are you?
Great.
Welcome today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So Bruce, tell us a little bit about what's your world of sponsorship look like? You know, how did you get started in it, and what do you do in sponsorship now?
Well, the story really goes back, and we'll keep it short. The story goes back to 2008 when I worked for an association that had a fairly successful sponsorship program as far as bringing in money, but it was a lot of category. It was 50 year-long sponsors, 4 categories of year-long sponsors, 200 sponsorable components at the annual meeting, other things we were selling a la carte. So the association brought in a consulting firm to revamp the program, streamlined it from 50 companies in 4 categories to 20 companies in 2 categories, got rid of all of the a la carte sponsorships, and kept it pretty much revenue neutral. And the CEO of the association, I was working in another role at that time, CEO of the association asked me to be the new point person for corporate partnerships. And his marching orders were to move the program from the transactional to the transformational. Now, as I said, that was 2008. Then we got to 2009, 2010, and the economy took a nosedive. So we had companies that were paying top dollar for this new program that I knew we're going to get no new direct business in the next couple of years. So that kind of set me on this path to look, what are the real value propositions for the companies as well as the association and its members. So we revamped the sponsorship program a couple times, made it much more customized to each company and to the needs of members. And then about 6 years ago, when I left that association, I started consulting with the goals of helping associations increase sponsorship revenue and member value.
Awesome. And you know, you're talking about, and we were sharing right before we joined onto this webinar, we were just talking about kind of the change from sponsorship to partnership. And we were talking about dates, and you were talking about when you start, you know, we're in this doing sponsorships. And I was sharing this book. This is one of my early books when I was doing sponsorship back in the heyday. And this is when, this is pre-partnership talk, which we'll get into. But I just thought the dates that you were mentioning and my dates of my books that are still on my shelves, I can't part with them. I'm a hoarder. I can't help it. But I just thought that was just kind of funny to hear your dates and kind of relate it back to my own experiences well.
Right.
Well, welcome, Bruce. I'm really excited about this. And we also have Barbara Armentrout, who used to be a DCer, but I feel like you still are because I see you around, Barbara. So
As long
welcome.
as there's Zoom, I'll be there. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad. Barbara, tell us a little bit about your sponsorship journey. I feel like when we get together and talk about sponsorship partnerships, we tend to be in sync. So this conversation today, I'm really excited about. But tell us a little bit about your background and
Sure.
sponsorship stuff.
Well, and I started off in publishing, and I was often a sponsor. I was the wallet or ATM that associations came to. So I understood it from that point of view. Then I switched over to the association side. And a few years ago, I was pre-lockdown. I was working with an association, and my goal was to move their sponsor revenue from the one-off transactions, buy a booth, these kind of things, to year-long partner relationships. And this association had been very cautious about what they would or would not allow to be sponsored. They were so skittish about taking money. In the course of some of my conversations with former exhibitors, I learned about a pending merger that was going to take place right before our big annual conference. So the conversation pretty quickly moved to how we could help them make a big splash and be known as a good employer in the industry that they were representing. So we launched a year-round program. And one of the things this group really wanted to do was sponsor the opening reception, which anyone who's put on a meeting knows this is like one of the most expensive tabs on your event. And so they were happy to start off their year-long partnership sponsoring the big opening party and make it a big splash. But my triumph was almost squashed when the board heard about it because they were horrified. No one had ever sponsored, we've never had a sponsor for that. We don't know if we can accept this. What on earth is Barbara doing? But I made it work with a little bit of coaxing, and having a check in hand didn't hurt. And it got the partnership off to a strong start. And then we added educational webinars and other activities to reinforce the partnership as a thought leader and not just a credit card. But it was amazing how quickly the association was willing to leave money on the table because we don't do things that way.
And I think that a lot of our guests today can probably resonate with either hearing that from others in the association and trying to figure out how to move beyond that. And that's what today is all about. Let's Gil, let's share the results of our poll so everybody can see who's in the room with us. So the first question, do you have a partnership program? And it's interesting, half of you don't, but at least, more than half of you do. No, sorry, I'm not reading my numbers right. Half of you don't, but no problem. But a lot of you do have some sort of program. So that's great. We're going to actually start off today's conversation with just kind of explaining what the difference is. So I'd be curious to see if after we explain it, if you all will change your answers a little bit. The second piece is the barriers, and we do have a part of today's conversation just to talk about that. So it's interesting here at staff capacity. I can relate with that. That's something that we hear a lot about. Barbara, Bruce, is there anything specific that kind of brings your
I like the number, the 29% who have challenged persuading current sponsors. So we will definitely help you on that area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, and the staff capacity, you're right, is definitely a challenge. And it's interesting, I think within the association profession, we often don't think of sponsorships, as a position we need on staff. We always think, oh, we need someone for education and marketing and membership and research and all these other programs. But where is that bench strength around sponsorship? And I think what's interesting on the first question, that about half of 50% have sponsorship programs only for events. Barbara and I do interviews with a lot of sponsors when we're working with associations, and a lot of them are now saying sponsorships do not really work for them at conferences. And even when it's a very good sponsorship, it's 3 days. And I had a sponsor a couple of years say, we market 365 days a year. So even with a little of the pre and the post around the conference, that's not enough. And I think also what happened during the pandemic, and some of the even pre-pandemic, I heard from companies that said, is there more than just the conference? And then when we all had to cancel conferences in a couple, 3 years during the pandemic, I think some of those companies used that as an opportunity to kind of tiptoe out the door and say, okay. And they definitely couldn't stop marketing for 2 or 3 years. So they had to find other avenues. So what we're often now finding is when associations say, oh, we're back to the in-person, we're back to the expo, come on back. And the companies are like, maybe we'll come back with a smaller booth, but we found other ways to get the word out and to achieve our goals in the last few years during the pandemic. So that's the challenge. The good news is, and I think those who have sponsorship programs around the year can attest to this, there is money to be had. The companies are not cutting their sponsorship budgets. They are just deciding where they're going to spend the money. And I had a sponsor probably a year and a half ago during the pandemic who said her sponsorship pie, her dollar pie is the same size as the last couple of years. However, she's cutting bigger pieces. The associations that provide the value are getting more money. The associations that provide less value are getting less or no money. So the opportunities are there for sponsorship revenue.
Yeah, it's all about value, which I know you're going to get into. But before we dive into the specifics here, let's talk about what is the fundamental difference between sponsorship and partnerships. Bruce, do you want to get us started with that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, sponsorships, the dictionary definition is kind of brand identification, brand naming. So you go into the symphony hall or the sports stadium. And the book that you held up earlier, Vinnu, from IEG, the consulting firm that formerly worked with associations, they kind of now moved on to other venues. But they did some research that showed when you see all those logos in the sports stadium, and then you interview folks when they leave the stadium, maybe they recognize the company logo over the scoreboard. But for the most part, all those logos along the stands, nobody recognizes them or remembers them. So when I think back to the association I used to work for that had 200 sponsorable components at their conference for 9,000 people, it just eyes glaze over on the logos. So again, dictionary definition is kind of name visibility. And I remember a company came to me a number of years ago and I was asking them about their banner ads or signage or whatever using their logo. And they said, Bruce, we've been a sponsor for 10 years. We're a major player in this space. Everybody knows who we are. We don't need another logo placement. We don't need to sponsor or get our name on something. So partnerships are more truly partnering with companies and finding those common goals. What is the company's expertise? What is the association's mission, the needs of its members, and how can we bring those together to truly partner to meet the needs of members and fulfill the goals of companies at the same time?
Barbara, what are some of your philosophies around this? Should one way or the other, which is better, or is there?
Sponsorships are more transactional. It's like there are advertisers, there are exhibitors, and there are sponsors. A lot of those are relatively transactional. We're going to you and asking, would you please buy a booth? And don't you want an ad in the convention program with that? The problem with that is we're treating our sponsors like an ATM. We're going to them when we want money. We are also going to them when our association has a need, instead of when the sponsor might be planning out their budget. So if we're lucky, they put as much money in this year's budget as they spent last year, but we're never going to be able to move that needle up unless we develop a relationship. And the funny thing is, I saw a note the other day that, associations are in the business of relationships, and it's true, but partnerships are very much relationships. So how can we do what Bruce said, which is nurture the relationship so that a partner is getting an equal value proposition and all of the members of the association are also getting value out of it? How can you know what that is? Well, you are fulfilling 12 months of value. You're also having 12 months of conversations. You're also constantly nurturing that relationship with the partner so that somebody can ask me, what is ABC's priority for the next 6 months? I know the answer to that question. And I can figure out how can the association help them meet that ROI. Companies have to be able to measure ROI. Associations always have difficulty measuring ROI. but I'm straying off onto other, yes, I'm going into other rabbit holes here. Yes.
Right. Though that being said, I think it's less important what we call companies than how we treat them and work with them.
Yes.
And since we're kind of getting away from the gold, silver, bronze and the signage and the convention center lobby and all that, it makes less difference what we call them. I used to work for an association CEO who, first of all, never called the companies vendors. He thought that was a dirty word. And sometimes called them sponsors or partners. But if he greeted them, he would often refer to them as business friends.
Oh.
And that changed the whole tone of the conversation. I mean, occasionally there are associations that their bylaws say like only state affiliates can be partners, and we get into a legal thing around partnership and what that means. But I think call them whatever, call them, mission supporters or whatever, or leadership supporters. But it's really what sort of ways we come up with to build that relationship with them.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from both of you is sponsorships can be a one-off, kind of event-based or even a deliverable-based, right?
Mhm.
And then the other piece is kind of the time frame around it. Sponsorships are more open, not open-ended, but there's a defined time around it. And partnerships can be a little bit longer than that. Is that kind of what we're hearing?
Mhm.
Now, what
Should
is,
be.
yeah. So Bruce, in terms of like, what is really the issue? Like, why shouldn't I do a sponsorship, the program only, or can I do both?
Well, from the standpoint of the company, they're generally interested in the longer term. They're interested in a strategy to meet their goals versus a one-off. I mean, you look at the marketing approaches of most companies. It's not a series of one-offs. It's a series of things that build on each other, and the sum is greater than the parts. So it's all of that can be done with the association. So I think from the association standpoint, the advantage is actually more revenue. So for an association, and I just saw a couple of posts on Collaborate in the last day or so, what do other associations charge for a podcast? What do you charge for a banner ad? How many members do you have and what is the reach and all of that? To really take those benefits as a series of tactics and to go to a company and to say, wow, your company has expertise in quality widgets, and we're the widget association. So what if we did a year-long partnership? If we started with some research around that, and then did a press release with the research findings and a webinar based on that, and then did something at the convention, because we do want to include the convention, and then we do another webinar, and then we have like a networking discussion at the convention around quality widgets, and put all that together in a package. The total value would be far more than you could sell each of those components for. And it's actually easier. I mean, you do need, back to the question and the Q&A at the beginning around staffing, we do need that staff person to help pull all that together. But it's actually more efficient to put together those packages than to have those 200 sponsorable components at the annual meeting, plus the other white papers and webinars and all that.
And it eats up a lot of staff time to keep selling one-offs. I'm going to sell for the spring event now, and then I'm going to call you and ask for the summer event, and then we're going to get going on the fall event. And what are your ads? I mean, there are these constant asks that are going on and have to be processed. The sponsor also gets tired of all those calls and begins to tune them out. It's amazing when you can work out, here's your 12-month program. Here's what the total investment can be. You can work out, whatever the payment plan is. And I love it when they say, oh, I want to pay out of my current fiscal year. Can you bill me for that right now? That's kind of nice. But it's basically rolling it into one financial activity. And then from the rest of it, you're nurturing the relationship. And those are actually easier to upsell for the next year because you have a pattern and a strategy you can analyze and say, okay, this worked, this maybe didn't work.
And Barbara, I'm glad you brought up the money aspect of it, right? Like even though associations are technically nonprofits, we still all have expenses to pay, right? We still have to keep the lights on. We have to invest for the future. But Bruce, you talked a little bit about the revenue item, like exhibitors, advertisers, whatever you want to call them. For this conversation, let's use partners. So if they have a pot of money and that money it's not going away, but it's not growing, what is talk to us a little bit more about that. Get into a little bit more about the details. Why isn't that money going away,
Mhm.
and how can we capture that?
Well, companies need to continue marketing. And so I think in fact, their marketing budgets are probably increasing. But I think the point you made earlier, Vinnu, that it's really tied to the ROI. And it's not up to the association to guarantee an ROI, but it's definitely up to the association to build a relationship with the company that'll make it possible for that company to achieve that ROI. So for example, when I was working at an association, we had one of our top level corporate partners that came to us and said, can we sponsor the key cards at the convention? So I went to our VP of conferences and she said, well, the first challenge is we have 9,000 hotel rooms in 15 hotels. She said, the second thing is, let's think about who this sponsor is. They were a bank. They financed buildings on our members' properties. And she said,
Mm.
who usually sponsors the key cards? When you go to a motel, it's the local pizza place or the sandwich place down the street. Is that the right positioning? So if we think about our sponsorship programs as really being like a marketing agency, and to go back to the client or to the corporate partner and say, well, that's an interesting idea about the key cards, but what if, based on who you want to reach, which is probably a top slice of our members who may be building buildings on their campuses in the coming year or two, what if we set up some focus groups for you with that targeted group of folks at the convention?
Mhm.
And then you do the ROI math from there. So you meet 60 members, and that leads to 12 meetings, and that leads to 4 financing proposals, and that leads to 2 financings. That's your ROI
Mhm.
without doing 9,000 key cards. So it's how can we help be like that marketing agency and help companies? And for that, companies will spend the money, because actually we had another bank who was at that top tier corporate partner level, $160,000 a year for a year-long partnership. And they said, actually, if they got one financing closed as a result of their partnership, that would pay the $160,000.
I think that's so critical, asking the
Mhm.
question, what's important to you, and figuring out what is it that they need back to make this effective, and actually
Yeah.
hearing statistics like that, right? That makes such
And
a
I want to fold in a question Jessica has put into the Q&A because it touches right on this.
Yeah.
I'll read it for the recorded audience. If success of your conference generally relies on sponsorship, how does this affect your annual budget? Do you anticipate losing money on conferences but making it up in partnerships? Tricky question. I never recommend anyone lose money on a conference. Oh my God, no. So that's not what we're talking about. You always need sponsors. I don't want to call them the gum and candy bar money, but you always need the lower level sponsors of event related activities coming in. You need that revenue flowing. Not every sponsor is a candidate to become a partner. That's one thing. You may have 50 sponsors for an event, and you may have 10 partners for that event, because there's so much care and feeding that goes into serving a partnership. So yes, you still need those sponsors. It's a topic we were going to get to in a little bit, but maybe we'll just dive into now, which are some of the turf wars that I think are connected with Jessica's question, which some of it has to do with how the association chooses to recognize which department earned that dollar. And I've had some knockdown, drag out fights with some CFOs. And then, of course, we ended up kissing and making up. But it all depends. I mean, and Bruce, I think you had a situation a few years ago where some of the sponsor booths became a partner booth. So the person who was tracking revenue for the exhibit sales thought that her numbers weren't going to work. So
Right.
it's all just a matter of how you recognize it.
Right. So that's where you sit down with the CFO and say, okay, so of this X amount of money in partner revenue, let's move over 10% of that to the conference exhibit side of the ledger and make that whole. So Barbara and I often find when we do the deep dive into association sponsorships, we find a lot of revenue pockets. We find the public policy folks are selling webinars and they have a revenue goal, and the communications department is selling podcast sponsorships and they have revenue goals. And then, of course, the exhibit folks and then the year-long corporate partner folks have their revenue goals. And that's when we talk to the corporate partners and we say, we get 5 calls a month. And we
Mhm.
say, didn't I just hear from your association? Oh, that was my colleague down the hall.
Yeah, don't you
He's
people
selling
talk to each
banner
other?
ads.
Yeah.
I'm selling exhibit booths. So we're frustrating to companies, but I think, again, back to Jessica's question, it's like, yeah, let's make it easy for the customer. Let's make it easy for the sponsor and monetize it for the association. Sell the big package. And then if the CFO needs to divide up the revenue to the different departments, let's just do that on the back end and do that one sale, big sale, one purchase order, one decision for the company for more revenue.
Well, I
And I
think it's,
heard-
go ahead, Barbara.
I was just saying, I heard Dean West recently talking during an ASAE webinar about for-profit entering into association space. And one of the points that he made, Dean makes so many great points, but it was, is it easier for partners to work with your association or to go around it? Because during lockdown, they all found ways to survive without our association. So this is another example of, don't expect them to keep track of 5 different departments calling and asking questions. Have somebody coordinating it. And you do have to spend some of your time on the internal politics and make sure that, you know, there is a go-ahead that this can be done. It's not that you are owning those relationships. It's that when the person on the other end of the phone needs to ask a question of your association, what's the one point of contact they're going to start with, and then you will refer them as needed.
I really like how you all put the emphasis on the internal politics of things, right? Because
Oh,
we
it's
could
there.
say in theory, partnerships are great. You should do it. Go do it tomorrow, right? But in reality, we all have these politics, rules, whatever you have to do internally in the organization. And I think the KPIs are a big part of it, whether it's the budget or what your personal goals are or the department's goals. If those aren't in line with the changes that you make, that change is going to be a lot harder. Now that's change internally. You know, Bo asks a great question here as well. I'm going to go ahead and just jump into that. With this change that let's say you do make this change into partnerships, and there's costs that are going to be associated with it, and to make sure that it's going to go well. And I know we're going to go into a little bit deeper a little bit later, but I think we should just go ahead and address this question. How do you address that with potential exhibitors or sponsors that could be partners? And you're saying, okay, now we're going to do this great program, but guess what? There may be costs associated with it. How do you all handle that?
Well, I think what I can give one example, an association where I used to work, and we had sponsors for the lunch banquets at the convention. So first of all, there's no charge to the sponsor for the lunch. That was already in the convention budget. And we tried to make it a little more attractive. So actually one thing we did, we worked with the sponsor and put a set of quiz cards on each table in the lunch. So it was either a quiz about the city or something about the association's focus or whatever. And then we said to folks, while you're sitting here at lunch, fill out the sponsor's quiz card and take it to the sponsor's booth to find out if you had all the right answers to the quiz. So it also drove traffic to the booth. So the cost of printing those quiz cards was nominal. However, if the company had said, wow, and we'd also like Godiva chocolates at the lunch with our company logo, it's like, oh, that's an additional expense. You're getting a lot by sponsoring the lunch and getting the quiz cards that we're printing at the association. If you want the branded Godiva chocolates, then you need to pay. So I don't think there should be too many additional costs other than ideally this staff person that we're all looking for to run the program. There shouldn't be too many additional costs because the association should already be doing the webinar and the lunch and those sorts of things. We're looking for the company to come in and help support that and make it better. Barbara,
what's your take on it?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I was responding to Sheila's note in the chat, which is, you know, how we code the funds so that they flow in the right way. Yes. And I brought up another dirty word that I want to attack directly, which is UBIT. One of the things I had to do with the CFO once was I had to answer for every sponsor partnership dollar. Are we going to have to pay, you know, which is the business tax. And the beauty of it is a good partnership. Those dollars are reinforcing your association's mission. I mean, you're not just selling stuff for the fun of selling stuff. You are bringing in content that is helpful to your association's members. You are curating what it is that this partner is providing to your association and members. So it is supporting the mission. I mean, I could make a pretty successful argument that almost all of my partner dollars were not subject to UBIT taxes.
Right. Yeah, it's my understanding. This is not legal advice. My understanding of UBIT is there needs to be an inducement to purchase. So going back to the example of the quiz cards on the lunch table, if it's, what is the tallest building in the city and what season do the cherry blossoms bloom, take that quiz card to the sponsor's booth. That is not subject to UBIT. That sponsorship fee is not subject to UBIT. If that quiz card said, take this card to the sponsor's booth for a 10% discount on their product, that's an inducement to purchase. That is subject to UBIT. And if part of it is subject to UBIT, if there are ads or whatever that have coupons, do 2 separate contracts. So if it's $100,000 sponsorship, let's say $80,000 has nothing to do with UBIT. Let's keep UBIT out of it. One contract, another contract, $20,000 subject to UBIT, pay the tax on the $20,000.
There's always a way around it. There's always a way.
Cheryl is asking, is there pushback over the difference in the name between sponsor and partnership? No, it's like Bruce said earlier, we don't much care what these people are called, because some of the association documents say you can't call somebody a partner unless they're a state affiliate, that kind of thing. You could call them, Biff and Spud. I don't care, as long as the handling of the relationship with them is treating them like a true partner, and there's a sense that you're in this together. You're not just calling them up because, hey, I need to hit my numbers this month. And Cheryl, I hope that answers it.
Yeah, I think that's a great, and and I think, again, both of you have said this, it doesn't have to be called a partnership. It can be called whatever you want it to be. It's more of the sense of what is the program about, and that program, and that feeling that you want with person that's giving you money. You want to make them feel like they have an invested relationship.
And there's an understanding that if there are still all transactional relationships, if you're selling X number of booths, Y number of webinars, that equals the amount of revenue you're going to be able to generate from it. The most you can expand your program will be incremental at best. Whereas if you can curate a group of folks who are truly going to be in the trenches with you for the long haul, those are the ones that you can nurture and really create what we're calling a partnership. And those are the ones where you can earn some of the bigger dollars. And they tend to snowball and get bigger and bigger over time as they are realizing more and more value.
Well, to answer the question about partner, sponsor, and what you call them, one other way, and this ties into the answer to the question around, 29% of the folks said persuading current sponsors is a challenge. To call a company and to say, wow, we see your company has expertise in women in leadership, and our association has a new initiative around women in leadership. Can we talk? That says nothing about levels. To call a company and to say, we have gold, silver, bronze sponsorships for our upcoming convention. Could you give me a call back? I think we know which call is likely to get returned. So the first one makes no reference to gold, silver, bronze, partner, sponsor. We want to work together on a program around women in leadership or whatever the topic is. Can we talk?
And it's like anything with change management, right? Like anything that you're changing within your association, membership fees, new webinar series or whatever, you've got to communicate it. You got to figure out what your communication plan is, your messaging around it, internally and externally. We have another good question that I want to ask here. I know that we've gotten in from our attendees here. It's, how do you approach it when majority of your higher tier sponsors, partners are law firms? Law firms are great. Another industry that has a lot of money, but also a lot of rules. And
we could also say in healthcare.
Healthcare as well.
So many fences and guardrails there, Well, I mean, I want to go into, and it's going a little bit into our how to do things, but one of the first tasks that I and Bruce, I think, assign ourselves when we're approaching a new situation is you go on a listening tour and you begin to come up with who the candidates for partnership might be. But one of my first asks that I make of somebody on staff, and sometimes it's multiple somebodies, I want to know every dime that company A, company B, company C has spent with your association in the last few years. If they bought memberships, if if they bought hats at the ball game. I mean, whatever it is, I want to know from every single department what was spent so that you can get a sense of what is their total spend. And that begins to get you a sense of, okay, these people are really trying to do something strategic, or they just don't have somebody on the other end who can say no when a salesman calls. I don't know. But that will help you begin to curate the smaller list for nurturing. And whether you think you're going to develop a partnership program or not, if you are responsible for bringing in non-dues revenue, you should know who your top 5 people are, period. You should know this.
Right. I think the other differentiator, and I'm not sure if this was part of the question around law firms, if it was that they're all in the same business, because we often hear, wow, we have 4 banks, we have 4 consulting firms, we have 4 whatever that basically are in the same line of work. How do we manage that if they all want to be top tier corporate partners? And I think it gets back to what Barbara said. It's having a conversation with each company. What are their goals? Because I think it's a real challenge now to have what used to be called category exclusivity. We'll only have one pharmaceutical company, and we'll only have one drugstore, and we'll only have one whatever. Because of the mergers and the acquisitions and the technology, they all overlap so much. So what is the difference between a Google and a Apple and a car that uses Apple and Google? They're all one and the same. It's very difficult. And I'm not sure it's in the best interest of members. And this is all about members first. So I think the workable approach is to ask each company what not what they want in the way of a sponsorship, but ask what their business objectives and marketing goals are. And we may find they're different. They may be direct competitors. One might be launching a new product. One might be going through a branding change. One might have a new area of expertise. One might want to focus on something that's nothing to do directly with their product or service. They might want to focus on a mentoring program for new folks in the field, or a women in leadership program, or a DEI program. So it could be very possible to position 3 direct competitors with 3 completely different partnership programs.
And it's a matter of having that conversation, though. You won't know until you ask.
And a lot of sponsors and partners hate staffing a booth. I mean, for those of us who've had to stand in booths over the years, it's a special skill set. But it also means you literally can't work the crowd the way you would if you were a free agent. So a lot of folks will pay for, what would be the equivalent of a booth fee. They will pay more than that if they could have, as Bruce was saying, a focus group table at lunchtime. They could have a select reception for a certain group of the attendees. There are all kinds of things that you could offer 5 competing law firms that each give them a nice set of value and an opportunity to meet with folks. But you got to know what it is they're looking for.
So our time is flying. I want to make sure that we get into, we still have some time, but I want to make sure we get into some other areas that are really, I think people are going to want to know. So I want to start a new partnership program, and you guys touched points in different ways, but where's the first place do I start? I want to start a new partnership program. Where do I start?
What's gone before?
And I next would be talking to a group of your staff, board, and current corporate partners, and just say, we're thinking about some new ideas. How would you, and it could be very similar questions for staff, board, and corporate partners. How would you define a successful program? What would work for you? How do you see it being framed out? But definitely to include those top tier corporate partners, as well as staff and board, for 2 reasons. We get their good ideas, and we get their engagement, because I don't think we want to go back to staff, board, or corporate partners 3 months from now and say, oh, I sat in my office for 3 months and here's the new program, hope you like it. Because chances are, if they didn't have a say in it, they may not like it.
And when you're talking with them, you're listening. You want to have your few leading questions, but at the same time, you want them to do as much talking as possible. At one point, I used to call up and ask, so how do you measure success? And I found out real fast, well, that's a little too open, because, somebody who just wants to buy a booth and wants, 10 people to come up and buy my widget, they don't really have an answer for that. But find ways to, and it may depend on I was given a list of all of the people in the sales department who were going to be working a booth. I'm sorry, but I'm never going to be able to get to these people to talk to me about the strategic plan for the organization. And I also want to get into the marketing wallet. Oh, by the way, I don't want just the booth money. I want to talk about what is your company trying to achieve with my members. So you have to poke around a little bit and gently get your call pushed up to the supervisor kind of thing. And take lots and lots and lots of notes. And yes, have conversations with them as human beings. You're not, and I'm going into so many rabbit holes here, but the other important thing with the discussions Bruce was talking about is you are not selling anything in these conversations. You will not accept, I want to buy this right away. Can I lock it down? No, I'm sorry. We are still in our discovery phase. You want to get all of your information together as quickly as you can. Yes.
So great. You've got your discovery phase. Then you go back internally, you put together this great program. Do I just turn off my old sponsorship program and start the new one?
No, that's hard for most of us to do. So I think it's running them in tandem for a while. It may be, and it could be as you're building your new program, a sponsor's up for renewal. So you may renew them to the current program at that time, and then grandfather them into the new program or credit them into the new program. But at some point after, after 6 to 12 months, you need to be in the new program. And somebody that still has the old legacy agreements and the old benefits will need to fall by the wayside. Now, that being said, there is still a role for the transactional. If a company really wants to just sponsor the logos on the lanyards or whatever, you may want to offer it to the year-long folks first. But there still should be some of the transactional ones kept on the side for the companies that just want that level, and for the smaller companies that may want to move up to a bigger engagement later down the line.
And I create parallel media kits, one of which the public sees and one of which is pretty much for my use. And that is where I have all of the nice juicy things that I only want to offer to corporate partners first. It may be the most popular webinars, it may be the things that are aligned with their corporate values and strategic goals. But you do still need your media kit, your exhibitor prospectus for the people who are going to make the transactional purchases. You do still need that. But that's not how you're going to be selling the big, fat, juicy things. You do need to have those available because some of those are only available, it's a one-off. And what I find very helpful is whenever your next big annual meeting is, your chance when you are going to be face-to-face with these folks, or Zoom to Zoom, whichever it happens to be. But you do want to have next year's program fairly well sketched out, so that you can say, we are so happy that you took this corner booth. We are so delighted. Now, in the next year, here's what we're going to be offering. And you really want to start pitching it stronger to them if you've not had the opportunity beforehand. Because some of us really don't have time to even think 2 thoughts before we're getting ready for a conference. So definitely get next year set up this year as much as you can. Yes, Wendy just said, always sell your next event at your current event. Absolutely. However, Wendy, I want to say, I have been to plenty of shows where I had to sign up for next year's booth at this year's event. Once I do that, in my mind, I'm locked in, I'm done. I don't have to do anything more for that association until next year. And that's somewhat the opposite of what we're trying to achieve here. So if you do have some folks you want to line up for a longer term partnership, let them know, of course, we're going to get you your booth in the right place, but we're going to have more conversations first.
Right. And that's where you can grandfather them in, give them the credit for what they spent on the booth and roll that into the year long. This concept of working with companies, this exploratory and developing the approach is not foreign to it may be foreign to the booth person. It's not foreign to the VP of marketing at companies, because many of these companies are spending far more with marketing agencies than they are with associations. And there are many similarities between the two. So associations have marketing channels, communications channels, audiences, segments of audiences. If you have that staff person that can be like a marketing account exec for companies. So companies are used to buying this way, and they're used to having customized packages put together, because nobody goes to a marketing agency and says, I want to buy the gold, silver, bronze client relationship. They go and they explain their problem. And as Barbara said, the marketing firm will ask question after question after question and then come up with a response or a proposal a few days later that says, oh, your company needs these 5 things. And oh, that's going to be $120,000. Does that achieve your ROI? Is that agreeable to you? So this process is very familiar to companies. We've just been so locked into selling the very transactional sponsorships instead of the partnerships with all of the marketing clout that associations have.
And the other biggest mistake I see many associations making is we'll give them a custom product, a custom offer for X number of dollars. And then they'll say, oh, and I also want 10 tickets to the gala party or whatever, can you throw those in? And associations will tend to throw those in. If you go to a marketing agency and you say, I want to throw in, I want 5 extra emails to go out in this cycle. Sure, here's the fee for that. So yes, we can accommodate anything people ask for, but we do want to be aware that there is a value attached to this. And if this is something important to them, keep it in the conversation and assign the dollars to it.
I do want to come back to the value conversation, because as a meeting planner, I also have my own thoughts about that because of the way we do it in the industry. But before we do that, I do want to talk about the staff capacity, because that was a big area of concern for most of our guests today. Bruce, you're asking us to be marketing account executives. I'm struggling just to put on my conference. What do you say to organizations like that that just don't, it could be a capacity issue, it could be a skill issue, how do you go about that? How do you create a partnership program, make sure you set it up for success, and have the right staff people for it?
Sure. Well, let's talk about staffing from 2 standpoints. One, the point person, and that maybe a full-time person might be part of somebody's job in a smaller association. And then let's talk about the role of other staff. So there does need to be a point person. And if an association were going to launch any other new initiative, a distance learning initiative, a research initiative, an international program, somebody is going to have to staff it. And if that program is going to be of any sort of size and capacity, it is not likely to be successful if it's just an add-on task to somebody else's position. So the concept is not foreign to associations that you need to find a way to staff up either with internal staff or consultants. So there is a point person. Now, what's also interesting in a marketing agency, the account exec in a marketing agency does not deliver any services. They manage the relationship and make sure the services get done. So another analogy with associations, we look at something like the annual conference. Every department, virtually every staff person has a role for the annual conference. Leading up to the conference, definitely on site. I think most of us have worked with associations where upwards of 95, 98% of the staff is there on site. You are either doing a session or working with the committee or meeting with the board or stuffing packets, or you're in charge of the money, or you're taking tickets at the event. Everybody has a role. And the same process, I think the same overarching goal concept should be true of sponsorship. So if the person in charge of sponsorships, whether it be quarter time, half time, full time, goes to the person working on the podcast and says, wow, we got a sponsor and we said we'd help them with a podcast. Can you, communications director, help with the podcast? Or to go to the IT person and say, the sponsor wants a slice of our members. They want to know how many HR directors are of certain size member companies in New England. Can you, the IT person, help me find that list? So I think everybody, in the same way they do for the annual conference, everybody on staff should have some sort of role as it fits into their other duties to help with the sponsorship program the same way they do with the conference.
And it's important at staff meetings that this is constantly reinforced. We all have turf wars that we deal with all the time, but, thank the IT person for helping make sponsor so-and-so happy. Make sure you're nurturing those internal relationships, because I have worked in a place where there were slightly toxic internal relationships, and it was very hard for me to do my job. So you do want to work on the internal politics. And I had another point that I was going to make, and now I have forgotten it. So we'll move on.
Well, we have a few more minutes, so you can get that thought. Before we kind of wrap things up here, Gil, throw up the contact slide. I want to make sure that everyone knows how to get in touch with both of you, because we can go on for hours on this topic, and you have so much to offer. We haven't even, I mean, there's so much more we can talk about. Gil, throw up that slide and show everybody how you can get in contact with Barbara and Bruce and myself as well. I come from a very different background when it comes to sponsorships. I have the meeting hat on, so I can relate with you all on the conference and events and protecting that revenue that you want to get, but also really believe in this partnership concept as well.
I thought of one more resource I wanted to toss out in follow up to Bruce's conversation, which is if you are with a really small staff, or if you're with a place where you just don't have enough team members to do some of the administrative tasks, a lot of the AMC companies are now doing fractional help in these areas. And there are folks out there who will do ad sales, exhibit sales, things along that nature. I'm not saying they should run your partnership program. Those should be closely held and always done by an on-staff person. But for all of these other tasks that need doing, you can probably get some help with those. And it's not expensive when you compare what you'll get at the end versus the money you're going to leave on the table if you don't do these tasks.
You know, as with any program that an association rolls out, you can dream up the luxury model of a partnership program and have all the bells and whistles, but based on what your budget, your capacity, your timeline is, you really need to kind of think through those. And when you're looking at building out your partnership program, and do something that's realistic, that sets your organization up for success, makes those partners happy as well. Now, I do want to leave on the note of valuation, because I really, really love this topic. Now, I'm a meeting planner. I have lanyards. They need to be sponsored. Let's say this is part of a partnership. My lanyards cost $5,000 for a very large conference. Do I charge my partner $5,000 for that lanyard? Trick question?
No. Well, I think the first thing is, again, it cannot be rolled into a year-long partnership. And can we, and the point you made earlier, can we determine what a company's ROI is? And because I think we have generally undersold ourselves when we think of conference sponsorship. So I have a client I started working with, and actually we launched their new sponsorship program in February of 2020, just as the pandemic began.
Oh, great time.
And we weren't sure if it would be dead in the water. But it was an association of nurses, and they had no year-long sponsorship program until the one we recommended. They had a $5,000 conference sponsor that had expertise in respiratory and product. So they did have a product to sell, but expertise in respiratory. Beginning of the pandemic, obviously respiratory in hospitals and healthcare settings was a huge issue. So we moved that company from a $5,000 sponsorship to a $50,000 year-long sponsorship, with the opportunity for the company to provide information to the nurse members about caring for patients in hospitals with respiratory. So it was a win for the company. They got huge amounts of visibility. It was a win for the association's member nurses because it made their jobs easier. And ultimately, it was also a win for patients who receive better quality care. What is also interesting about that example is, while the company clearly had product to sell, the nurses are not decision makers in buying that product. They are influencers, but they're not decision makers. So to find companies where there is a common goal, so that was a clear one: pandemic, respiratory in hospitals, company that has expertise. Can we talk and put together a partnership? So that's now in its third year. I think it's up to $60,000 or $70,000. So doing the math of $5,000 times 3 versus $50,000 times 3, that is the opportunity. And actually, we never really, we priced it not so much based, Vinnu, on the cost of a lanyard or the cost of producing a webinar. It was on what we believed the company would see value in doing. And for some companies like the bank I mentioned earlier, wow, if they could get one financing, the fees from that would pay for $160,000 sponsorship. And in some cases, we can just ask companies as part of this exploratory, how would you define a win? And if they say, wow, if I got 4 new signed contracts, and you could even say, and I've had a couple of companies where I've signed a non-disclosure agreement. What is that worth to your company to get 4 new contracts? And that can give us an idea of what to charge.
But you're asking them to name the dollar value, not talking in generalities. How many dollars will this represent for you? Yeah.
for the sponsor or for the partner, it's not about the cost. It's about what they get back and the true value. And then I got to tell you, I keep coming back. And I think the reason I've held on to this book for so long
It's
is
good
because
stuff.
it's got a great worksheet in here that assesses not the cost of your sponsorship item or your partnership item, the deliverable. It talks about the value, and they actually did set some industry standards back then. And I was looking at some of the things that, you know, like 3 cents per direct mail. And I was like, oh, well, I'm sure that's gone up, if people even do direct mail anymore. But looking at it from what does that item or what does a whole partnership deliver in terms of value. I know now I'm not on that partnership sponsorship side. I'm more on the partner side. And I go back to our partners, our associations, and I say, okay, this is what I need out of it. Let's develop a custom program. These are the type of people I'm looking for. You know, I'm not so worried about the cost, because those costs are going to be costs that your association has anyway. And I'm sure that with my partnership dollars that you're going to cover those costs.
And Sandy is asking to post the title of that book. I honestly don't know that you can find it except in a remainder store. It's a 2003 edition by a company that has been reorganized multiple times since then. You know, it was IEG at the time.
Yeah, but you know what I'm happy to do? I will go back through my notes because I am also a data hoarder, which I know I shouldn't be, but I probably have an Excel worksheet with some of those in it as an example. Keep in mind, it will be out.
Well, now that's a value add to this. Let me tell you.
So I'm just happy to share that with you. I'll do that when we send out the recording. I'll dig that back up.
Yeah, I think the one other point, Vinnu, on the valuation and the pricing is it's a negotiation. So we can go to a company and say, you know, if you want to do that, it's going to be $70,000. And if they say, you know, we have 50,000 in our budget this year, you can negotiate down. If they say we have 40,000, you say, well, maybe can you sign a 2-year agreement? That would be 40,000 this year and 60,000 next year. So it's a negotiation and a process. Or if a company says, you know, I only have 30,000, well, we can do an 18-month agreement. We don't want to get all ramped up for 6 months, but can we take that money and can you do a commitment and do an 18 months? So it's a negotiation, which again is a different process than we're used to. When for decades we've done that prospectus with the gold, silver, bronze, check off the box, you know, send it to sponsorships@xyzassociation.org.
And Nicole, I am right with you. Direct mail can be effective. I actually miss the simplicity of direct mail, so I'm not knocking it. But
I was talking with a client the other day about using direct mail, and I was explaining the whole concept of lumpy mail to them. You know, something that I've lived with my whole life and they didn't know. So great.
Well, I want to, we are out of time. And before we leave, I want to tell everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We definitely have to do part 2 and 3. I think someone said that in the chat. This was great. Barbara, before we leave, what parting words do you have for us?
Remember that bigger is not always better. Some of your partners don't want to reach your entire membership, but they're willing to pay dearly for the ones that they do want to reach. So be sensitive to that when you're having conversations. And despite my ability to talk all the time, listening is the most important part.
And Bruce.
Well, I think to follow up on Barbara's comment, not only reaching a segment of your membership, but if you are a smaller association, there are some companies who would rather be the big fish in the small pond than the small fish in the big pond. So you may be able to compete with the bigger associations. But yeah, it's about having the conversation with companies and not leaving money on the table, because companies are going to spend money. And if they're not spending it on your association, it'll be another association or an ad campaign or a direct mail campaign or a marketing agency.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for such a great, this hour went by so quickly. Thank you. Everyone, make sure you reach out to Barbara and Bruce on LinkedIn. And I would love to connect with you as well. I'm going to put my LinkedIn in the chat. Be sure to reach out to us. And then also we'll make sure you get the recordings, all the credits, all the good stuff. But also most importantly, I know we didn't talk about this today, but don't forget about your digital assets as well. Your event technologist and your event partner will have a lot of different opportunities that you can fold into your partnership program. So that's a whole nother conversation that we'll have one day. But again, thank you. Thank you both. Thank you all for spending the time with us. We know that you have a lot of webinars you can choose from. We're glad that you chose us and hope to see you next time. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye-bye.